And then it would be my honor to be welcoming if Marja Salonen is the first PhD graduated from the group. So, oi oi. So Henrikki Tenkanen was the second one who graduated as a PhD from the Digital Geography Lab back in the days, and now is an assistant professor at Aalto University of Geospatial Technology. So Henrikki will tell about his current research. So welcome, really nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much, and yeah, it's super nice to be here, and congrats the whole group. I'm indeed one of the, I guess, oldies in Digital Geography Lab, or it was Accessibility Research Group, indeed, as was mentioned by Tuuli and so on. So I think I joined maybe 2011 or 12, something along those years, and then spent some 7 years or so at the group back in the days, studying exactly these these themes, what has been mentioned already earlier here, and more or less now I'm leading this GI Science for Transformation, Sustainability Transformations lab at the Aalto University, and we are kind of a sibling group in a way. Part of it is because, yeah, I grew up to to these themes, and we have more or less kind of continued along similar lines of research, but also a little bit of differences. But anyway, interested in kind of sustainable mobility related questions, and using big data, spatial analytics to understand these questions. But yeah, today I will be focusing on one of the research projects that focuses on kind of understanding the carbon emissions from daily travels, more or less. Elias nicely introduced you to the ideas of using kind of the donut economics and kind of the sustainable accessibility as a theme. So this is kind of focusing on the environmental perspective of this. So basically what we aim to do is to try to understand and map the carbon emissions related to our travel, kind of combining the views from accessibility as well as the mobility, so understanding both the potential and the realized mobilities in cities. And kind of as a motivation, so what probably has also triggered interest for so long to these themes is that from the environmental perspective, so transportation is a large emitter globally, and the thing is that changing or decarbonizing transportation have seemed to be super tricky. So we are way off from the target until 2030 if we think that we should try to decarbonize the transportation sector. And why this is so, it's mostly because of us, because of humans. We are super stubborn, and it's difficult to change these behaviors that we have, and so on. Naturally, there are various things that are at play in here, but definitely kind of the human component makes it quite tricky to decarbonize, especially our day-to-day kind of travels in here. What kind of interests us in this project that I will be telling you more is that could we use this kind of data-driven information about the distribution of emissions at city scales to basically to be better targeting, for example, these kind of sustainable mobility incentives and kind of improve planning and so on. And why we think that there's quite a bit of potential for actually doing changes in terms of the travel behavior and so on is the fact that if we look at the statistics about like how people travel and how long distances people travel, so basically these kind of day-to-day travel that are done by car, so they tend to be quite short. So basically in US and in UK and in different kind of countries in Europe, so majority of the trips that are done by car are less than 5 kilometers long. And there is, because of this, there is of course huge potential if we could somehow make people attractive to use, for example, cycling. That might often be even faster way to travel these kind of short distances than car. So this kind of gives a bit of motivation where we are going and what we are doing. So we have this project called MAPICO at Aalto University, which basically is about mapping commute-related carbon emissions with high spatial resolution using big data. And in here, so this is funded by Research Council of Finland. It has now run for a bit over a year in here. And what our target is to basically to be able to map kind of the sources of emissions from travel at statistical grid level. So whether kind of combining to Statistics Finland's grids or then using something like H3, Uber, kind of hexagons and so on. And our aim is to kind of be able to indeed map these things, but also to provide temporal information about how these patterns change, for example, between different seasons and so on. So we aim to kind of create more or less like monthly level data about these patterns. And while doing these, so similarly as in DGL, so we are also kind of doing software development at the same time and aiming to kind of publish these tools so that people around the world could be more or less repeating the same things what we're doing here. What we use and how we do this, so basically there are different approaches how you can kind of model carbon emissions. So you can basically use these kind of top-down methods where you use something like satellite-based information and then try to kind of distribute it in more accurate way. Our approach is more or less the opposite. So we use this kind of bottom-up approaches where we use data about people's realized mobility. So basically from telecom operators kind of data as well as these kind of app-based data sources. So as all of us have quite many different kind of applications installed to our phones, so that is actually one source of data that is also used to gather information about the mobilities of people at a more accurate level, because all the positioning methods of a phone is actually used to pinpoint where a person is located. So we kind of use the information about the mobilities and mode choice, so which is another area that we are kind of interested to understand whether actually this data could be used to detect what is actually the dominant travel mode used and so on. But at the moment we have mostly been using like travel survey information, which is of course a good indicator as well about how people are moving. So for example, this is from Helsinki region, basically showing how the amount of car, like usage of car increases when the distance is increasing and the amount of walking and cycling is kind of diminishing. But this is kind of one source of information that we use, and then we combine this naturally when we are trying to understand the emissions, so this kind of emission factors considering how the electricity is produced, in this case in Finland, and basically we use this life cycle assessment way of measuring, so not only kind of considering the direct but also indirect emissions, because like manufacturing an electric car, it actually kind of requires quite a bit of energy that is not sustainable. So actually I think at the moment it takes around 3 years of driving quite a bit an electric car before the emissions are actually lower than using a gasoline car. And then indeed we are also using the R5Pi, which is one of the libraries developed here, Digital Geography Lab, and so on. So this is more or less where we kind of route the or kind of extract information about the most likely routes that people are taking, and then putting all of this together, we produce this data that we have. And this is a very nice thing to try to kind of explain shortly in a scientific paper, so that's one of the challenges that we are facing. But we have done some preliminary study, mostly producing this information in Helsinki region. So these are some of the findings. So here we have this kind of bivariate choropleth map, which basically combines all this information that I explained. So we have the travel demand for kind of the mobilities. We have the information about modal split, so how people are likely kind of moving between different places, and then the travel routes and distances by public transport and car. And with car, we consider congestion and also parking time / distance in there, and then the emission factors. And this is kind of how the patterns look. So as we can see, there is quite a bit of diversity in here, which is, yeah, our urban system is quite diverse, and people are kind of using different ways of moving. But to make this a little bit more evident, so we did this kind of using local spatial correlation method to understand whether there are specific neighborhoods that can be identified from this data for car and for public transportation. And basically what we see in here is, well, I think this is similar pattern has been seen quite much earlier with the accessibility studies that we have done, that Helsinki region is kind of constructed, and it's more or less very, the geography influences a lot these patterns. So naturally the central kind of part of the region, so there is typically, like on average, the distances to places that people are going tend to be lower, and then on the outskirts of these areas we have these kind of high emission neighborhoods in here. And then in this kind of Espoo area, we have interesting that there are, based on the data, kind of both the high emission areas and the low emission areas are quite close to each other, which is interesting. We haven't yet looked like what is actually going on in here, but that is something that kind of raised our attention in here. By public transportation, kind of bit similar patterns, but naturally the Helsinki city center area, where there are like super good connection by public transport, using mostly like metro and train and so on. So those are kind of the key low emission zones, and typically people are also traveling a bit shorter distances. But then we see kind of again these high emission zones, mostly in the areas that are a little bit further away from train connection, so using buses and so on. But yeah, we kind of have this evident edge effect in the results, which is mostly due to how the geography and connectivity in the region is looking. So this is basically what we have done to understand where we are and what is the status. But basically we have done some previous work basically to create scenarios based on this kind of information. So what is actually the impact if we would take those 5 kilometers as a threshold and basically try to promote using electric bike instead of driving by car? So what could be the impact of these kind of things? And here we tested before COVID and after COVID these situations and how things look for Otaniemi campus area in this case, and we saw, mostly due to the COVID and people not returning to work still, so we see quite dramatic drop, but it's mostly due to the reduced travel demand in this case. But now we are kind of working on investigating, for example, could indeed something like generative AI or these kind of tools allow us to actually create these scenarios with relatively quick iterations of these things. So I think there are quite interesting possibilities in there. So we have one student who is starting to work on these things at the moment. Yeah, and indeed this is our group. We are around 12 persons at the moment, and that's it all from me. Thank you.